Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to the fourth annual Washington Forum on Northern Ireland. I'm Kimberly Cowell-Myers here at American University, and we just wanted to give you a little bit of update, a little bit of housekeeping. We have had to abbreviate our program. We are very fortunate to be able to stay open until 2. Thank you to our wonderful provost for making that accommodation for us. Instead of what you are seeing in your printed program, we are going to run our first session from 11:30 to 12:30. We'll then take a 15-minute break, and lunch is in the, what do we call, the breezeway out front. And then we will have our second panel from 12:45 to 1:45. We'll close by 2, so you can all get to a secure location before the storms come in between 3 and 6 this afternoon. I'm going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Carol Gallagher from American University.
Hello, and thank you all so much for coming. I'm not quite as tall as Kimberly. Thank you all so much for coming in the crazy weather, and we're just delighted to have you here. And I'm delighted to introduce you to our provost, Vicki Wilkins. I won't belabor it except to say that she has been so supportive over the last several years of us running this forum, allowing us to make this happen, allowing us to work across schools, and in fact across universities. And so I'm delighted to welcome Vicki Wilkins, our provost.
So I'm trying to be of a younger generation. My printer would not work this morning, and so I have my remarks on my phone. I have never tried this, but it's like, you can see it's like one word per line because they're so big. So we'll see how this goes. But thank you so much for being here, and I'm so happy to be, again, part of this great event. It is so important to what we do as a university, how we function within our city, and the relationships we have across both universities and across embassies and offices. It's very tempting when we talk about Northern Ireland, especially here in the US, to focus on the past, in part because that past is so jarring to the American experience and how we think about the Troubles and what went on, but also in part because Northern Ireland's successes in arriving at a peace agreement 28 years ago were so extraordinary. The motivation behind this collaboration, known as the Washington Forum on Northern Ireland, now in its 4th year, is to recognize and honor the ongoing work of the people of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the rest of the United Kingdom in creating and institutionalizing peace in the present. This year, we extended the conversation in important ways and shifted our attention to what Northern Ireland can teach the U.S. about working across political and communal division in areas like policing, education, and the marking of historical moments in policymaking in everyday life. As we think about 250 and how we mark that at the university, I was drawn to these remarks and how we do start to mark moments in our history and how we take notice of those. And so included in today's program is a discussion of how to mark the contributions of migrants from Ireland and Northern Ireland to the United States. I'd like to thank the Washington Forum on Northern Ireland for putting together another fantastic day, sorry to have to abbreviate it, of lectures and conversations, because as the provost of American University, it's my pleasure, and it's just been so important to me to watch 2 of our fantastic faculty members lead and collaborate so closely with faculty from Georgetown and Ulster University. We're so much stronger because we work together in the city and across the universities to bring together these special conversations and understanding how to pull together folks from across all of these conversations and bring them to places like Georgetown and AU and across DC. It's especially impressive, especially when we consider the weather, to see people from Ireland and Northern Ireland, Great Britain, and even here in the U.S. coming in today to have dialogue, not only today, but in every year, and especially on this week of St. Patrick's Day festivities. I want to acknowledge and thank all the speakers who are here today. I know the conversations are going to be worthwhile, and we're going to learn a lot. We have so much to learn from Northern Ireland, and we are grateful for their willingness to share their experiences, their insights, and their time with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge some very important partners that make this all happen, and that's the support of the British and Irish governments through the Irish Embassy and the Northern Ireland office, plus the Northern Ireland Bureau here in DC, the Washington Ireland Program, the John and Pat Hume Foundation, and the Health Fund for Faculty Development in AU School of Public Affairs. I thank all of those partners, and we look forward to the many future opportunities we have for collaboration with all of you. I'd like to give a special thanks to a couple staff members who played a very important role in making today happen. Lauren Costello, who is in events and the whole events team from the School of Public Affairs, and Che Rao, the SPA communication team, especially Darian Mitchell, for all they've done to promote and bring forward today's event to make sure others hear these conversations and we can spread the good words. So I'm going to wrap up and I'm going to bring up my colleague and friend, Kimberly Kalmeyer.
I'm going to be super brief and introduce our next speaker, who is the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland. You can read all about Emma Little Pengelly in your booklet, but I wanted to add two things that are not included there that you might find of interest. One is that she's a WIP grad. I was reminded of that this morning. The Washington Ireland program brings young people from all backgrounds in Ireland and Northern Ireland to come and work and have experiences here in business, in government, and policy. It is a wonderful opportunity for students to think differently about their own situation and learn a little bit about ours. The other thing I want to let you know is that Emma Little Pengelly has graced this event on two previous occasions, so this is her third year in a row, bringing her star power to our stage, and we're so grateful to you that you would spend this time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those very kind words and introduction. It's a real joy to be with you here this morning and to have the opportunity to give you just perhaps a little bit of insight from my perspective in relation to our journey in Northern Ireland, and in particular, where I feel that perhaps some lessons can be learned, not just in terms of trying to bring reconciliation about, looking at the challenges in relation to conflict, but in particular deeply divided issues, deeply divided divisions that can actually have a significant impact, not just in terms of political life, but of course in civic and community life as well. I join you this year when it does seem that conflict is indeed all around us. Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the conflict in the Gulf, tensions in a number of regions remind us of the risk and reality of war. It reminds us that complacency in itself is such a dangerous thing, that conflict, in fact, can raise its head very, very easily. And the risk, of course, of terror is all around us too. But we're also seeing the battle of ideologies strongly and passionately held that rages very much now on the new forum of division, which are the social media sites and online, and lots of dangers and new issues that come with that. And I think it is a timely reminder that when we look back at the conflicts of the past and the things that perhaps brought about an ending or progress in relation to those, we also still need to look to the future and look at new and emerging issues and threats. We know how powerfully what is said online can actually translate and transfer into real life. And in fact, to use a terrible phrase of the twittification of real life, where the anger and the passion and perhaps the nastiness and the threats that you see online can so easily trickle over into real life and how people speak to each other and speak with each other. It's great to see so many young people here as well. I would always say that in terms of my experience, that I have one foot that is in the pre-Belfast Good Friday Agreement time and the rest post. I was 18 in 1998, so I grew up, and a huge amount of my years of development was very much in those crossover years between still having, unfortunately, those aspects of violence and terror and seeing the impact of that, but also looking at those negotiations and then the post-1998. And I'm very conscious that my generation is that crossover generation. We still remember where we have come from and all of the reasons why it is so important to try to move and progress on. But we've also been able to then go to university, to have our jobs and to live and bring up our families in that post-Belfast Agreement, St Andrews Agreement era. But I think it does give me that perspective in both sides of that, and perhaps a little bit of insight as well. For the young people in the room, in terms of my background, I'm currently the Deputy First Minister in Northern Ireland. And I'm sure that you have learned this through your course as well, it's a power-sharing arrangement. It's a joint office, so everything that I do in this office, I do along with the First Minister. So that means every letter, every policy, every formal response to a question, that all is agreed between both the First Minister and myself, both of us from very different political backgrounds. Both of us have very different views on the key constitutional question. And not just on constitution, of course, two very, very different political ideologies. So that's a challenging system which is based on inclusion and indeed on consensus. And that was very much part and parcel of some of the big learning from our peace process in Northern Ireland. I love coming to DC in this week because we get so many opportunities to talk about Northern Ireland. I'm very passionate about Northern Ireland. I really believe in Northern Ireland. I believe that we have so much that we should shout about, but we also, in my view, have such an incredible future because, you know, the first thing I would say very clearly is our story is not finished. The journey is not yet completed. We know that we have a part of a way to go. And to me, really taking the next step forward is about really getting that really strong economic prosperity back for Northern Ireland. That is, without doubt, in my view, the strongest way to try to ensure stability in the future, the strongest way to protect against any future conflict. And Northern Ireland has come so far since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, including in relation to those economic aspects. Today, Northern Ireland's industries are in the new and emerging sectors. It's in AI and digital, cybersecurity, health and life sciences, creative industries with the opening of Studio Ulster, a really cutting edge studio in the creative industries. But for decades, of course, we had been based in the traditional industries, but you know, I am all too acutely aware that Northern Ireland's reputation on the global stage was a much more challenging one. Violence dominated the headlines. What people knew about Northern Ireland very often was of the very worst of what was happening. And we went from a very small place that really punched significantly above its weight on the international economic stage to one that was trying to deal with decades of very, very difficult and troubling times. And, you know, while we can look even to some of our closest neighbours that spent during those decades of time investing in infrastructure, investing in skills, investing in the future, too often we were focused on trying to ensure stability and security. We were focused on trying to rebuild what had been destroyed by the bullet and the bomb, as opposed to investing on infrastructure that was fit for purpose for the future. And, you know, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement gave us that opportunity. It wasn't easy. You know, I came in as a special advisor to the then First Ministers, and I was a special advisor for a very long time. But I came into that post in 2007. So it was just after the St Andrews Agreement, which was such a critical part in trying to build up and to secure consensus for the institutions. When we talk about what the world can learn from Northern Ireland, I do believe that there are very valuable lessons, not because everything in Northern Ireland is perfect. It absolutely is not. And those in the room, and I see many of them from home, you will be very aware of the journey that we have yet to go. We know of the challenges we still face. But I always say that looking at the Northern Ireland process, and it was a long process, you can learn as much about what went right as you can also from what didn't work. And I think that that's such a valuable thing as well, to be able to take a look at, you know, what were the challenges and are there ways of getting around that if you are applying those broad principles to other conflicts. No two conflicts are the same. You know, we know that with the passage of time and new threats and new issues, as I've said, online and other things. But, you know, I think that the core principles are very much still there. And I think there is still a huge amount that we can learn. But I also think that Northern Ireland should be a beacon of hope for many people, because while the young people in the room may not remember this, those that are a little bit more vintaged will, that looking at Northern Ireland, it was felt that this was a conflict that simply could not be resolved, that the deep divisions were too deeply and strongly held. And yet, you know, we were able to get to a point challenging, difficult. It took many, many years. It took a huge amount of investment, not least that support from here in the United States to build that peace. But we have had that relative stability now for over 25 years. And I think the first issue that I want to talk about here today, the key lesson is about having that continuous vigilance around peace. Peace isn't something to be taken for granted. We see that with how quickly things have emerged on the global sort of geopolitical front. I remember having a conversation with somebody not that long before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and they were pondering the fact that actually this concept of street by street conflict was something of the past, that the global conflicts or these types of wars in the future would be fought by air and by drone. And yet within a very short period of time, we saw the traditional tanks rolling through and street by street fighting. And I think that, to me, this is very much about ever being vigilant. Peace is a process that requires careful attention. It is something that we need to cherish. It is something that needs to be worked on. And at the heart of all of that is very much people. No matter what it is, and this morning I was speaking at the Washington Ireland programme, but should that be in terms of business collaborations, academic collaborations, political agreements, ultimately, no matter how much theory that you look at, it comes down to people, it comes down to relationships, and the investment in people is such an absolutely important aspect of that. When I look back to the big characters of the peace process, many of those people had had the opportunity to come along to programmes, to be invested in terms of skills, in terms of understanding, in terms of encouragement, to get to know each other and to understand each other much, much better. And that is something that we do require. Every generation brings about new opportunities and new challenges. But the investment in the skills of those people who will become those emerging leaders, the people who will then take places on to the next level, is so critically important. And I think that's why I am passionate about trying to get more younger people involved in politics, because while the big issues seem to roar around us and seem to be so challenging, maybe so bitter, people with very strongly held, deeply divided views on so many issues now and unafraid to say them and shout them loudly, like ultimately these things will only ever be resolved with people coming together with the right skills and showing that leadership. In Northern Ireland, it wasn't an easy process. It was an iterative process. It was a long process. And I think, in terms of sort of the third key lesson, it is that peace is a process, not just an event. And while we can celebrate the signing of the Belfast Agreement, the reality was that Stormont wasn't re-established permanently beyond that. There were challenges and there was risks. And I think when we look at that, to me, this is also about the courage that leaders need to show. But very often in my experience, when you look internationally and you look at home, it takes very strong leaders to be able to sell compromise. And I know that sounds quite strange at times, because if you're not involved in that, people externally can often want people to go faster and deeper. They want people to go quicker and to compromise much more easily. And I always said that you can only be a leader if people are prepared to follow you. And while it is absolutely right to be brave, and we would not have got to the resolution in relation to Northern Ireland, we would not have achieved so much through that process, only for the bravery and courage of political leaders. It is also fair to say that you cannot go so fast or so deeply if indeed you're going to lose the people that you need to be able to buy that compromise, to get behind that compromise and to support what it is that you're trying to do. So I think that is important, that we often talk about the strong man principle now when it comes to politics, but actually strong leaders are always in the better and best position to be able to sell difficult compromises. You have to build that trust with people so that when you turn around and explain what it is that you're trying to do, that you're confident that people will then come in behind you. Because if they are not, that is the route map to political instability. If you're doing something that people fundamentally do not want you to do as their representative, you will simply be replaced. You will not be held up because of your courage. You will be replaced, and the person who comes in behind you may well have won that platform by taking a even more harder line position. So I think, lesson in terms of lesson number 4 is very much around trying to build up some of those political leaders in very difficult circumstances, invest in them, understand why perhaps the pace of change, the pace of compromise can be frustratingly slow. But you are much better to have a slower process that cements, that people can get behind, that people will follow and buy into, because that is the only pathway to stability. If you create that internal instability, then, with weaker leaders, then that peace agreement, even if that is done, will not last. And I think that is really important and something that internationally people have seen the need to invest in. And of course, I think with our contemporary online world that many people live on now, many political leaders get heavily criticised for not going faster, for not being braver, from other people who are sitting outside that, not understanding the dynamics. And I think that is something that's absolutely missing. Sometimes you have to give people that little bit of space to be able to work through and perhaps take things incrementally when others just want the big event and the big brave decision, because that person simply will not last to be able to embed the peace. Following on from the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, we still required that tending, that cherishing of what has happened. We still required the new reconciliation processes, the support for that. Because again, for those in the room, and I see a number of people who work with communities, like how quickly communities can become disillusioned with certain things. And I think sort of the next lesson from our process that I want to emphasise today is having that sense of fairness in what happens. In deeply divided societies, people will have things that are incredibly important to them. Not everybody will understand why it is important to those people, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that you recognise that for those people, this issue is very important. It could be a constitutional principle, it could be something cultural, it could be some aspect or other aspect of what they believe and what their views are. And I think any process has to be about respecting what is important to the other, while also demanding respect as well for what is important to you, and trying to find resolution where there is not a clear winner and a clear loser. That is not a process around humiliation, because ultimately, if you are expecting the leadership of any organisation or party or a particular group that are involved in these types of negotiations, then you need that person to be able to say to the people that they are in place to serve that this is something that is good for them, that this is not something that if they're saying, look, this is what I have produced for you, that others are purposely trying to undermine that to get political advantage themselves, because again, that will knock off the equilibrium that is required. Because I often say, in my experience, the most powerful emotion in politics, and indeed I think in life generally, is that sense of fairness. And if you have a group in society that feel that they are not treated fairly, even if you don't agree that they shouldn't think that they're not treated fairly, that is a huge motivating factor. It's a motivating factor that can create a desire for just completely new bodies, new parties, new treaties, new agreements. It can be something that really disillusions people, that allows people to want to pull away from a process. So no matter what is done, it must feel fair to all sides. And I would say, when I look back in Northern Ireland, it's not just about what people were running towards in terms of the proposal that was on the table. The harsh reality is it was very much about what people were running away from. People had got to the point where despair was a huge motivating factor. They were seeing people that were being killed. They were seeing the heart of their communities being attacked. They could see the fear that people were being brought up within. And they could see that the Northern Ireland that there once was, the Northern Ireland that was at the forefront globally of the linen industries and shipbuilding and all of those things. The Northern Ireland, the Ulster region that, 250 plus years ago, so many people had come to America and started businesses, got involved in politics, were heavily involved in the drafting and signing of the Declaration of Independence. They could see the negative impact of the troubles of that conflict on our entire society, from our economy to our people, to the hopes, ambitions, to how young people were potentially going to achieve their dreams. And despair is a huge motivating factor. People just were so fed up with where we were, and it got to the point of a desire to compromise enough, but to compromise in a way that people felt was fair, was equitable, and could get things over the line. So I think moving forward, I think it was Maya Angelou who said, nothing that is human should be alien to us. It's an aspect of humankind. It's an aspect of human emotion. And understanding the other, understanding each other, that is such an essential part, even if you don't agree. And I would always say this to people, it's always really easy to agree with people you agree with. The big challenge in life is always about tolerating, having respect for, listening, and trying to understand things that you fundamentally feel are really, really wrong. And that is so much about life now. And I think that that is something that I feel we have lost in terms of a lot of the online narrative and dialogue on issues. This sense that, that this person is absolutely right and you are absolutely wrong. And this absolutism that comes in, and then people just cannot understand how anybody could possibly come to those conclusions. They try to other people who have different views from themselves. So I do think still, when you look back in Northern Ireland, you see so many of those broad principles. At times we have tried to go too fast, and that sounds odd because it was such a long process. But when things went too fast and people felt it was not fair, that the agreement was not something that was suitable, then people withdrew their support. And ultimately in politics, in leadership, in business, whatever role that you are playing, you're not there for yourself. You're not there to stand on a global stage and get the accolades and get the praise. You're ultimately there to represent the people you serve and to get the best possible deal and to recognise both the limitations but the opportunity of doing so. And just in conclusion, I do want to talk about the opportunity because I do think the biggest lesson for Northern Ireland, I would say to you this morning, is looking at the opportunity that comes post-resolving these issues. The prize lies on the far side of very difficult decisions. And that prize is huge. That prize is about building a Northern Ireland, building a place, building a community, building a dialogue, which actually allows every child to have that hope for the future. And I would say that is the biggest thing for me, having grown up in a Northern Ireland where conflict still raged, was looking at the hopes and ambitions of young people and realising that they were limited by the context that had been created by for them, not by them, but created for them by generations of failure to be able to find resolution to these big issues. And I think that is the challenge for all of us in this room, which is, when you look at any young person now, any child coming up to say, how do we build a place, a world, which is so much better for them than even what we have experienced ourselves? And I think that that does drive us to live a life of purpose, but it also drives us not to be so absolute. I care very passionately about my identity, my politics. I, of course, like everyone involved in politics, believe myself to be absolutely right in everything and every view that I take. But I think the challenge for me every single day, particularly within our system, which is designed for consensus and agreement, is about challenging yourself to say, right, while I do not agree with Michelle or whoever it may be that I'm talking to, how can I understand what our motivations are, what the motivations are, the aspirations, where can we find consensus? And I think that does lie in really trying to build that better future, no matter how difficult that may be. I do believe that Northern Ireland is on the cusp of something really great. I believe Northern Ireland can be one of the best small, agile economies in the world. We are the gateway to the British Isles. We're the gateway to the European continent. We have such a strong history of education, of innovation, of creativity, of engineering, of business. The very skills that so many of my ancestors who were Scots-Irish and Anglo-Irish and the Irish who came and they brought to America, that determination, the resilience, the ability to start again and to rebuild, that ability to look to the future and see what possibly could be, and that it could be so much better than simply what we have. Those are all brilliant skills to have, and I believe that we have them in tons in Northern Ireland. I see my role of being trying to unlock the potential, not just of ourselves, those who are, and many of them are in the room, who are established in leadership roles in Northern Ireland, but unlock the potential of the next generation. Because I think by doing that, we do cement the peace, we secure the future, and we really build a better future based on prosperity, not just on what divides us, but indeed that shared vision around what unites us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming and being here with us today, and it's lovely to have you back for a third time. So I'm going to introduce very quickly panel 1, Living and Managing Divided Societies. And I think at this moment, it's fair to say that America can learn a lot from Northern Ireland, and we're so happy to have the panel come to the front. So if you all would like to come up here, and we will get started with Duncan.
While people are arriving, my name is Duncan Morrow. I am Professor of Politics at Ulster University. I've been part of the team who have co-produced the Washington Forum in Northern Ireland for the last 4 years. And I was also on the board of the Washington Ireland programme. This has really become a fixture for us, and a really important fixture, because it gives us a chance to look at ourselves with a degree of distance. That's not on. Turn it on. It is on, yeah. I think it's on, yeah. Sorry, just hold it up to my mouth. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, you could see that. Normally, people can hear me. It's just the accent may destroy you. Sorry about that. So coming over the years to the United States, very often I think we have been in the position of really benefiting from some of the entrepreneurialness, the huge variety that is the United States, and all the things that can happen here, but also the interest and just the sense of solidarity with some of the dilemmas that we have been really, really important. I get the feeling now, after 28 years, that in some ways we have an experience which might actually be a kind of interesting to you, because, as Emma said in her talk, peace is not an event. What you discover when the people who have been fighting have to live with the people who are now making a peace is that there's more to be dealt with than even they thought. And while a political agreement does something for it, in a small community like ours, there are lots of memories, there are lots of habits, there are lots of institutions which all of which have been shaped by conflict, and all of which have to think about what change is about. Emma also said that, and she said, put it in a different way, but a journey of 1,000 miles is literally made up of steps. And the 4 people on this panel today are people who have taken and been part of steps which no single step is the story or the solution, but where, in my opinion, have been involved in some of the most complex and difficult areas of contention, but also of possibility in our community. So from the right, I'll introduce them, is Betty Carlisle, who is the Chief Executive of what's called the Shankill Shared Women's Centre. But the Shankill Shared Women's Centre is based literally, if those of you who have been to Belfast, on the peace line. It is the first building you cross when you arrive on one side of the wall. But Betty's work with women is rooted in a loyalist community, but has been characterised by the willingness to really take the issues that women are living with and make that an issue which is a bridge rather than a barrier. So Betty will talk about what it looks like to live in a really, sometimes a community that feels very under pressure, both economically and politically, and what are the opportunities that you can find in that type of community work. Roisin Marshall, sitting beside Betty, is the chair of the Corrymeela community, which has a long history in reconciliation work, but was for many years the chief executive of the Northern Ireland Council on Integrated Education. Integrated education has been one of the innovations in Northern Ireland. It is, those of you who have studied it will know that it's 7% of the population, and we were talking about this. Almost all of that is from parental initiative. And so you can say that's still very little, and so you can see the challenge of that, but there's no doubt whatsoever that the impact of integrated education has been as a question mark to everybody else. Even in as far as there are other solutions and people come up with these things, the fact that those questions are asked and that 7% of people now think this is one of the important aspects of education for us is new and has always and asks different questions. So from that experience, John Boucher is the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland. Policing was at the absolute apex of the violence in Northern Ireland for many years, and it was the only institution under the Good Friday Agreement where there was a specific commission set up to root and branch, start from the beginning. And you have to start from the beginning with an organisation which is absolutely characterised by its experience from the previous 30 years, which is of being at the forefront, and 300 officers were killed in the context of that. But on the other side is part of the symbolism of the whole conflict, and is seen as the front face of that conflict, and has been at the enforcement level of that conflict. So the change in policing is in many ways a miracle, that we now have this institution which is bought in by everybody, and yet is not bought in by everybody and still remains a political football in the middle of that. And leading an organisation like the police puts you every day into dilemmas that are specific, and at the same time, it's been one of our big success stories, is that we're no longer talking about people being killed on a daily basis. We're now talking about how do we finally make this the real police service for everybody. So that can be a problem, or you can see that as that's the right question to ask. The questions have begun to change. And Catherine Thompson, who's beside me, is now, is it Museums Northern Ireland? What's National Museums NI. National Museums NI, I always get that wrong. Is the Chief Executive of National Museums NI, which is the opposite of a dusty hidden place. Museums tell stories for the public, and the way we tell our history has been a huge challenge. The issue of what is the past and who gets to write it, and how do we engage with each other's stories. And Emma talked about many of our issues are we start from different places and we see different things from those different places. And the journey of the museums has been to be one of the most important front windows on telling our history, but also offering opportunities to look at the future and to look beyond ourselves. But to do that not just by preaching at people, but by inviting people into the stories of people, feeling objects, using things which are more physical as well. So I've always felt that the history of the museums in Northern is a really good story as a way to try to talk to each other when we're not talking to each other. And that kind of possibility that you might learn something that you didn't see before by using that kind of vehicle. And also, if you don't see something, you can challenge it back and try to get it in there. So that's been a huge journey. I've spoken too long. I'm going to ask Betty to start. She's going to talk. You've got a presentation, so I hope our heads aren't going to stop it. But Betty's work is encapsulated in a presentation she's just going to give now.
Hello, thanks very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. I love the city. The city is just beautiful, and we got a bit of a tour yesterday. I know that we're on an accelerated time, so I'm not going to hold up for too long. Shankill Women's Centre's been going now for nearly 40 years, and we have always brought women, Protestant and Catholic women, together. But I often seen women who were in centres and they were just in an old building and they were always making do. So I set out on a mission to get a bespoke women's centre for women and women from both sides of the community. So I'm going to tell you a bit about that. We won a European award. I was in Brussels October last year, and I had to go away. There was 266 applicants across Europe, and we were one of the finalists, and we won in our category. So I'm going to show you the presentation that I went over and did in Brussels. So it's only 6 minutes. For over 30 years, Northern Ireland conflict was gripped by a violent and politically charged conflict. It was fuelled by a deep division between Protestant and Catholic. Thousands were killed, injured, or traumatically impacted. The cost was immense, physically, emotionally, and socially. North Belfast was one of the most divided parts of the city and quickly became one of the most dangerous places to live. Catholic and Protestant living metres apart meant that conflict was never far away. Territorial disputes escalated into riots. Amid the violence, women were unseen and their voices unheard. Yet they carried the load, visiting prisoners, protecting others, keeping children in school and away from paramilitaries. This at a huge personal cost to women. In 1987, some local women said, "Enough. They formed the Shankill Women's Centre, a safe space to learn, connect and have their voices heard. Adopting the hummingbird as their logo that they say shouldn't fly, but soared anywhere, the goal was that we were going to teach women that they too could fly. In 1998, the Good Friday Agreement brought new hope. While peace was not perfect, it allowed space for repairing and rebuilding. The centre began to imagine something bigger, a shared space where women could connect and explore solutions towards peace building and good relations. But lock gates and walls still divided the two communities, a grim reminder of the lingering divisions across the city. However, beside this symbol of division, the centre saw an opportunity for unity. A derelict site right beside the gates became available. 10 years, in fact more, of tireless effort followed. Lobbying, fundraising, negotiating, meetings and form filling. The centre finally secured money to build a state-of-the-art shared space. Proof that women could not only fly, but they could build futures. But the journey wasn't smooth. Challenges such as COVID, legal setbacks and construction slowed progress. Veiled threats from paramilitaries who did not want these communities to mix, but they didn't derail the build. The dream held firm. Finally, construction began. The sound of diggers echoed hope, drills resistance, and hammers determination. Workers in hard hats covered the site. Foundations were laid. The dream was coming in reality. Eventually, the doors opened, welcoming women and enabling connections from across Northern Ireland and beyond. A beacon of peace, empowerment, progress and connection in a divided city. Then our real work began. The Empowering Young Women's Project puts them at the heart of their own personal growth and development. Through group work sessions, training, one-to-one support and fun activities, their confidence and self-belief is unlocked, enabling them to fill and achieve their full potential. The Changemakers Project empowers women politically, supporting them to achieve qualifications in conflict resolution, governance and good relations. Visits to governments and local authorities across the UK and Ireland ensures that their voices are heard. In our Life Skills project, young women explore relationships, peer pressure, and unplanned teenage pregnancy. Using computerised dolls, they experience motherhood's realities. The dolls demonstrated are fetal alcohol syndrome, drug-affected baby, and shaken baby syndrome. Our Health and Wellbeing project takes a holistic approach to the prevention of social isolation through physical, emotional and social initiatives. It provides counselling, a listening ear, alternative therapies and, very importantly, a cup of tea and a chat. The Shared Education Project offers a safe, inclusive space where women can access basic and higher education. It promotes lifelong learning, helping women to build confidence, fulfil potential and enter or return to employment. The Volunteer Project supports women who want to get back to their community. The training provided enables them to support the work of the centre and gives them a sense of purpose and pride while building their confidence, knowledge and skills. The Women's Network brings women together from across Northern Ireland and Ireland. A space is created where issues can be raised and solutions offered. Their voices are amplified to ensure they're heard by decision makers, helping them to shape future government policy. Our childcare unit supports the projects by providing free or affordable childcare. This is of the highest quality, which encourages children of all ages and background to reach their milestones, teaching our future generation to grow together in this community shared space. But the centre is more than all of this. Women from divided communities come together, forging real and meaningful relationships, just like Betty and Isabel, a Catholic and a Protestant. The differences that once divided now unite. Shankill Shared Women's Centre is more than a building. It's a symbol, a healing space, a future, and a place to grow. A beacon of hope and a place to connect. Women are the peace builders, and now they finally have the wings to fly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betty, and we'll get a chance to have a chat later on. Thank you very much. Roisin, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and it's my privilege to be here today to explore what it means to live in and to manage divided societies. And for me, this is not an abstract question. It is woven through my earliest memories, my education, and my work with communities seeking a shared and hopeful future. I grew up in Northern Ireland, like a lot of folk today, at a time when deep division was part of the landscape in Northern Ireland and still is. Yet, even in those years, there were moments when I experienced a different viewpoint than that of my immediate family, community, school. And I'm so grateful to America, and I say that most genuinely. America, in a sense, rescued me, because as a 10-year-old child, I went to Wisconsin in Midwest America and spent 2 summers with a Lutheran family. And it was called the Children's Programme of Northern Ireland. Those experiences were small but powerful windows into what it was like to grow up in a different family, different religion, culture, background, and so on. And I had other experiences growing up working with children with disabilities. Since my sister had one and my mother made me go with her to whatever she was going to. But that was a wonderful way for me as a Catholic growing up in a small rural village in Northern Ireland to meet people from a Protestant background. But later in my life, I became involved with, well, I was a teacher for a start, and I've experienced in all the different sectors, special, controlled, Catholic maintained, integrated. And a little bit about shared and integrated education, you may or may not know, but we had a situation where you have controlled and maintained schools, very good reasons, but probably because we had a Catholic maintained education system, de facto, a lot of the controlled schools were mainly made up of those from a Protestant background. A lot of diversity in those schools today, but I would suggest that that was because of the impact of integrated education on Northern Ireland. Mainly, as Duncan said, developed by parents like me who wanted to have their children be educated with children from other backgrounds other than Catholic, from my perspective. And that was a great experience for me. And I guess I would always say that integrated education was the biggest, most cost-effective, most sustainable community relations project that we have in Northern Ireland. And although there are 7% of the school-going population who go to integrated schools, the ripple effects of that is quite magical, I believe. There are children from all over, and hopefully a lot of people involved in other programs and other education systems that can create our future and change our future. Integrated settings in Northern Ireland do not eliminate conflict, but they do intentionally plan to teach us how to navigate it well. They help us become citizens who can manage disagreement, hold complexity, and respond to tension in ways that make actively trying to create things for the better. And my work with Corrymeela, the community up in Ballycastle in Northern Ireland, built on that foundation. And I see people time and time again come together discussing long-held divisions, and it's both challenging and transformative. Healing does not happen, in my view, because people suddenly agree. It happens because we create spaces where people feel safe enough to tell the truth about their experiences, to listen to the truth of others, and imagine a future that is not trapped by the past. And if I can give one practical example, we have been working for over 20 years on the Excellence in Integrated Education Award, and I was at an event, excuse me, just last week. And one of the principals there, was a principal of a small primary school, sorry, a big primary school, right on the edge of the peace walls that were some of the visions that you can see in Betty's presentation. But he talked about the 31 kilometres of physical peace walls that divide us in Northern Ireland, and the 27 interface barriers that are known mainly to those who live locally. If you know, you know. And he talked about the fact that 56% of the staff in his school had no direct experience of the Northern Ireland Troubles, and yet the barrier along the school is a constant reminder to him of why they need to do what they do. But the question that he asked was, where did the barrier come from? Who put it there? And he suggested that attitudes were the barriers there, and that our job as educators were to try to dismantle the barriers. And education, not just of children and young people, but education of adults and others. And I wonder sometimes if we need to be curious about the fear that would lead to more better understanding and therefore less hatred and mistrust. He talked about hatred and mistrust as a shape shifter, and I love that analogy. So just a few things that I have that I think I would offer as messages for dismantling barriers in divided societies, but I'll not go into them now because I want to give everybody else a chance to talk. But I guess the work that I've been involved with in integrated education and community dialogue through Corrymeela and in initiatives that bring people together across divides, it's slow work, often fragile, but deeply hopeful. And it is this work that allows divided societies not only to survive, but to flourish. It is the hope that keeps people like me and Betty and Duncan and Catherine and John and Emma, our Deputy First Minister, always get that wrong. And hope is never a good strategy in my view, but it is essential. And it's sometimes the only thing that endures over time. We have great hope for Northern Ireland and its unfinished journey, as Emma talked about earlier. But our collective asset and our shared histories, we will use to imagine our future to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Roisin. And I'll just hand straight over to you, John.
Thank you. I'll be quite brief, I think, because we'll probably get some questions. But so, as Duncan explained, I am the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland. And a very quick history lesson. When the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, was achieved, one of the outcomes, and it's seen, I think, as one of the most successful elements of the Good Friday Agreement, was something called the Independent Policing Commission, which was done by a guy called Chris Patten. Chris Patten was a very senior politician in the UK, and he knew nothing about policing, which is a good thing. It's a really good thing. But he learned very quickly, and he brought in a group of incredible people who wanted policing to succeed in Northern Ireland. So the Patten Commission was published in September of 1999. So 175 recommendations. And it basically sets out about policing in Northern Ireland needing to be human rights based and community focused, transparent and accountable. And I would say that overwhelmingly it's been a huge success story. But when you look at Betty's presentation and you listen to Roshin's story, we are a society still emerging from a significant conflict, and they remain huge, huge challenges for policing. And I think policing is something of a lightning rod or a litmus test for how successful as a society we are in Northern Ireland. And a couple of brief headlines around that. Firstly, I never miss the opportunity to talk about the vocational element of policing. There's a lot of young people in this room. And one thing that we need is everybody in Northern Ireland, not just the two traditional communities. Northern Ireland is changing. The world is changing. We have new and emerging communities who are thriving in Northern Ireland. But in the last couple of years, we've seen two significant periods of disturbances, disorder, where those communities have been attacked. And we've gone from seeing what was an everyday occurrence of sectarianism to really awful racism. And that's something that I think we are seeing on a global trend because of what's happening in the world. Sometimes I do question if the world's going backwards or forwards. We've got to be kinder to each other, and we've got to recognise that our differences are actually our strengths. And for instance, the people who in those disturbances were subjected to awful assaults, they're the mainstay of our health service. They're the ones that are looking after us. They're our doctors, our nurses. These are professionals. These aren't people who are exploiting any sort of system. But we've seen two significant periods of disorder in August of 2024 and in June of last year. And we need to make sure that we, as a society, are more accepting of each other. The second thing, just around policing and a fundamental challenge for the police service for Northern Ireland, and I've seen this globally. I joined the police service in 1983. That's 1983, not 1883, but it's a long time ago. But it's changed. We used to be supported as an organisation by the political parties. We would often, because we deal with such complexity, we deal with such challenges, we're the ones that have to get in harm's way. And sometimes the outcomes aren't what we'd wish. But generally, society, the courts, people would support us because it's a job that many people would not and could not do. It's an incredible job. And I think in Northern Ireland, we still are not where I'd want us to be with regards to the support for policing. And in the pattern report that I mentioned, and I'm very boring, it's paragraph 15A, if you want to look at it, or 15.1, sorry, and 15.2. Chris Patton talked about everybody in society in Northern Ireland, and it's literally a quote this, all community leaders, all political leaders, all local councillors, all priests or bishops, all teachers, all sports authorities have got to stop the discouragements against policing and have got to actively encourage people, young people, to join the police service of Northern Ireland. And I see Chris Patton, he's an octogenarian now, but I saw Chris a couple of weeks ago. That is something that's not sufficiently happened. And I know with Ulster University, we're looking about having a debate about that in June to try and talk about where we've got things wrong as a police service, but as a society that we are more supportive of policing. Linked to that, and I think that there are real links to this, policing hasn't really been funded in the ways that I know and recognise education and health have been in Northern Ireland. So broadly, the health budget's doubled, and I understand why. Real challenges in health. The education budget is about 25% above what it was in 2010. The police budget hasn't changed. So our workforce has shrunk considerably. Now that is a real challenge to deal with, what I think we need to deal with in addressing paramilitaries and some of those people, the images you saw in Betty's presentation, because we should have 950 local officers in our communities and we've got just above 400. So there's something about linking to supporting of policing. The other thing is legacy. And you'll often, any of you, and I would think everybody in this room, has done some studying of Northern Ireland. When the Police Service of Northern Ireland was created, we inherited the responsibility the legal responsibility for all that happened during the Troubles. And there's not a week goes by that there is not a story in Northern Ireland about a disclosure challenge from the police around a particular Troubles-related incident. And that has a very detrimental impact on trust and confidence in the police. And it's something that I think when Chris Patten did his work, he didn't anticipate that 25 years later, it's our 25th anniversary in November, we would still be dealing with the Troubles of the past. And just to give you an indication that it's not going away, in 2014 there were 150 civil cases lodged against the PSNI for Troubles-related matters. In 2018 that was 850 and it's now 1,200. So we've got to come up with a collective plan, and there is a lot of work being done by the British and Irish governments into this, and I won't get into that now, obviously, because of time. But we need to come up with a model that assists us in policing to deal with these issues. And we shouldn't be left carrying that responsibility. I do just want to say, because Duncan mentioned it, over 300 police officers were murdered. Being a member of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, George Cross now, was to be a member of a police service which was the most dangerous police service in the world to be a member of. And it's not just those that were murdered, and I see many widows and families and go to many events, life-changing injuries. And there's not a police officer during that time that I've met that has not been significantly damaged, and we should never forget that. And I know there are issues on all sides with regards to what happened during the Troubles. Last point, very quickly, representativeness. When Chris Patten did his work, something that he wired into the report was called 50-50. There were only 8% of the RUC were Catholic or nationalist officers from a nationalist background. By saying with the new police service of Northern Ireland, you'll take 50% Catholics and 50% Protestants, that happened for 10 years. It got the numbers of PSNI officers from a Catholic background up to over 30%. And to have over 30% of a constituency means you have influence. So that stopped after 10 years. But the fact is the applicants for the PSNI from a nationalist background have never been much above or just below 30%. It's never changed. So I go back to my first point that Chris Patten said, that all those community leaders and various people in responsible authoritative roles should support policing. We've not done enough to get that trust and confidence in there. And there are three reasons why a lot of nationalist Catholic officers, people from a Republican background, don't join the police. Firstly, it's that there's a threat against us. So in 2023, an officer, John Coldwell, was shot multiple times because he's a police officer, not for any other reason. So our police officers all have to carry a gun. So the distant Republicans who don't sign up to Good Friday Agreement, and they are still a challenge for us, they have a murderous intent towards my officers. So when you join the police in Northern Ireland, you have got to think, is this for me because of the threat to me and my family? Then this is the bit that we've not done enough about. People from that background want to join the police, but when they do, friends turn their backs on them. I've spoken to many officers who said, you know, they're in a GAA club, their friends won't speak to them anymore. This is the greatest job in the world. It's better than being a teacher or in the medical. It's incredible. You change people's lives. And yet we've got people still saying, if you're going to join the police, I'm no longer going to be a friend of yours. And the third thing is they're worried that if they join the police, will they be treated properly? Will they be promoted? And we've got to address that. We've got to do more around those things. So policing is a challenge in Northern Ireland, but it's a good news story. But this year, with our anniversary, I think we've got to have a debate we've not had probably for 25 years, because we're at a crossroads, as to what we're going to do to protect ourselves as a society for the next 10, 20 years. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed. Catherine, I'm going to hand it straight to you.
Thank you. I've got the best job in the world, John, so I'm going to try and convince everyone of that now. We've talked a lot this morning and everyone's talked about journey, so maybe I'll just give you a little bit of perspective on what I see as our journey as an organisation at National Museums NI. I'm 10 years in my job, so I joined an organisation that had significant cuts in its budget, lost a lot of staff through restructuring or through voluntary exit, and we were kind of a bit of a tipping point. And as a leadership team, we had to sit down and go, what are we here for? What is our role and purpose as a group of museums in this society? And I think every group of museums in it has to respond to the context within which it lives and operates, and the collection that it holds. And so we really wanted to be clear, firstly, on our purpose, and then secondly, how we were going to go about fulfilling that. And today we are talking very much about living in divided communities and living in a post-conflict society. And I think one of the things that we at that time were doing very badly was interpreting our contemporary history and the period of the Troubles. We had a Troubles and Beyond gallery at the Ulster Museum, and I think one of the things that everyone could agree on inside the organisation, outside the organisation, the media, visitors, was that it was really quite poor, and that would be an understatement. And so we've had to go through quite a significant shift as an organisation in terms of what we do. And not to discredit those that went before me, but interpreting our history is really difficult because there's absolutely no consensus on the events that happened, on how we ended up where we were, and the legacy of that, and how we move forward. The gallery that we had at the time didn't actually have any objects in it, which as a museum is would be very strange, and it was very passive, and it lacked any courage. So we had to recognise, I think, first and foremost, that what we were trying to do was really difficult, and we had to engage and talk to as many people as possible, to partners, to stakeholders, to our audiences and the people that we work with, and we had to listen, evaluate and learn and develop as we went along. So we were fortunate to have some investment from an organisation at home called the National Lottery Heritage Fund that allowed us to have a collecting programme, and we worked over a number of years leading up to the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement to really strengthen the collection that we held, and to work with an academic advisory group. And just ahead of the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, we reopened the Troubles and Beyond exhibition and held our breath. We were really anxious about what the response to that would be. And I'm delighted that the response has been overwhelmingly positive, but it was only the start, I think, of our journey, and we have moved quite some way over the last 10 years in terms of 6-7 years in terms of how we developed that. I think for us, the first and foremost thing we had to do was to recognise that we weren't going to be giving a version of history or events and what happened, but actually we need to recognise that there are multiple perspectives, and to allow those multiple perspectives to exist and those voices to exist together. I think one of the most important pieces of text that we have on the wall of the gallery is that we have a shared history, but we don't have a shared memory or lived experience, and that's our starting point. We need to recognise, a bit like the Deputy First Minister said, is that we are coming from very different places. And I think the greatest respect that we can pay anyone is simply to listen and to try to better understand what their perspective is and where they've come from. So through the gallery, we try to use it as the start of a conversation. It is a space where we can ask difficult questions, but it's a safe space and it's a shared space, and we want people to be able to come together and engage in dialogue and debate. And ultimately we hope that it will be somewhere where people can challenge their own perceptions, but also learn something about somebody else's perspective. So engaging and talking is absolutely fundamental to what we do within that space. I think I'll just maybe just say one other thing, Duncan, because I am mindful of time and I'm just a blow into this panel. So they thankfully bumped me up so that I could join the chat. And John talked about the fact that we are living in an increasingly diverse society, and I think it's important through the work that we do in museums, we need to recognise that it's not binary. We are not a binary society with just two communities, but we actually have a very significant growing what they determine other community. And we have quite an extensive world cultures collection at the Ulster Museum as well. And we have a programme called Inclusive Global Histories, where we're really looking to challenge ourselves around the objects that we hold, why we hold them, should we hold them, but more importantly, what is their significance, and culturally, how were these objects used. And we often don't understand an awful lot about them. So it's been a real opportunity for us to engage with local newcomer communities and also with international communities to try and better understand the objects that we hold and how we interpret them and within the museum. And it has really helped us to diversify the audience that we have coming into the museum. We always say that nobody's going to visit us if they don't recognise or see themselves within the walls of our museum and the voices and the stories that are told. So it's great to be able to engage around that as well. But those are just a few thoughts that I'll just put out there and join the conversation. Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you all very much. I'm reminded, just as you finished there, there's a part of the whole process of we've had to move forward in, which is about moving from storytelling to being spaces of story hearing, because it's only from moving to storytelling to story hearing that problem solving can really begin. And what John's talking about, the kind of, and what we're all talking about here is, how do you begin to problem solve? Well, you can only problem solve with people who you feel you've had a chance to tell your story to, but also where you feel something of your story has actually been heard. And so all of these processes, we talk about relationship building, all these things get very fuzzy and people think they're soft. Actually, they're much harder. They're much harder. I really resist this stuff about hard and soft now. I think we have to start talking about hard and harder, because you're dealing in a quagmire of all sorts of things, of people's emotions, but also people's memories and real things that happen to people. And the challenge of our community is that the future has to be lived with people who were your enemy, who you thought of as a threat. And so it never feels like a straight line. It always feels like a few steps forward and then something comes back. Every step forward raises a new issue. And so the new issue has to be dealt with in its terms. And only if you have some vehicle for storytelling and story hearing can that move. And I think that's been part of our learning process. For 30 years, we could do no hearing whatsoever. And what the peace process has allowed us to begin to do is begin to put our feet onto this ice, but it is still ice, and you are still testing it, and nobody's told you which is the thin bit and which is the thick bit before you step on it. So there is an element of be also telling each other our stories of our experiences of the different parts of this. And I think you've heard today that there's no one entry point. If you've got an entry point in the community on the Shankill Road, or in the schools, or in the police, or in the museums, it's about how does that entry point be useful or valuable, and how does that build up into a story that we can all tell each other across completely different worlds. And somebody said the best job in the world. I think I've got mine too. I'm happy with mine too. I'm not taking any of yours, so that's fine. I've got one question and I'm going to open it. We only have so much time, and the question I would like to ask is a very simple one, which is what you're most proud of and what you're most anxious about if you're looking at this, because I think that's both sides of this. In other words, the second part of it, I just want to unpause. What are you most proud about in your work? What do you think is the thing that you think, if you look back, I'm really pleased we did that? And what do you think, looking at this situation, we have to address, or there's a risk? So Betty, I'll go to you first.
Okay, well, I mean, it's easy. Just the first one, the building. It's an 8.2 million building that went up, and we are bringing women in from across the divide. That's just an easy answer, really. What I'm most anxious about is that there is still veiled threats from paramilitaries in our community that don't like us doing what we're doing. They're not going to stop us. We're going to keep on. Some of them didn't even want the building to be built, to the point that there was veiled threats as well, not to go onto that site and not to build. It was an old bonfire site that was used on the 11th of July, if people know about that. So they weren't happy anyway about us taking the bonfire site in the first place. So I think it's a threat, but I don't think it worries me too much. I think that we're very strong, and we're a very strong organisation, and always have been. I was born and brought up in the area, and I know these people, so they don't frighten me. And they can, they don't come to me. But that's why I call them veiled threats. They come through different ways, but so far nothing has come off it. But I think, just come back to I said a bit about Changemakers, our political programme. I've seen over the years that it's kind of, I call it mirroring government. Whenever I see our government, our assembly, and they're nitpicking at each other and they're just one-upmanship, it tends to happen in the community. And there's been over the years when I've seen government working together, the communities work together better. So they do look upon, and I think the Assembly needs to do a lot of work to start saying to communities, it's okay to be together.
Okay, I'm aware Kimberly's given me the eye because the tornado is coming, whether we want it or not. But I'll just let Roisin answer the question if she can, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, very, very quickly. So proud of the development of integrated education from 28 pupils in 1981 to development of nearly 80 schools. But the impact of integrated education on the rest of the education system is the thing that I'm most proud of. And lastly, what I'm most anxious about is we talk about peace and reconciliation all the time, and I'm very comfortable with that. My worry is that in peace, we might lose something. I think seeing conflict as our greatest natural resource is really important. And we've got to, as Duncan said, listen and hear the stories. I believe that our enemies are just people that we haven't heard their stories yet. Thank you.
John?
Oh, listen, I'm. This is not anything to do with what I've done. I'm incredibly proud of the police service in Northern Ireland. They turn up day and daily and do remarkable things. I think they're superheroes. There's a TV program in America, I think you get it through BritBox, it's called Blue Lights. If you've watched it, you should know that every single storyline is based on a true story. So the first series are all about a particular, and it's a true story about a police officer who'd been a social worker for 10 years, came from a very nationalist Republican background and wanted to join the police, couldn't tell his parents, couldn't tell anybody. His wife thought, it can't happen. That is the first series, his story. And then the subsequent series are things that we have introduced to the script writers, the people who've experienced some really tough things. And I'm delighted, although this will be risky and I'll get lots of criticism for it. There's quite a controversial ego in Northern Ireland called Stephen Nolan, who does a radio show. And Stephen was criticising the PS9, and I'd not been there very long. So I went to find him, and we sat down. At the end of April, there's the first programme there's two series of 6 programmes of what I would call the true blue lights. So Stephen's gone out with our officers, and it will be shown in Northern Ireland first, but I'm telling you, this is award-winning stuff. It will be shown everywhere. And it does show that we're leaving a lot of society behind, by the way. It's a sad watch because of alcohol dependency, drug dependency, mental health, and that grassroots organisations are not being funded to be there. So the police are picking that up. So I'm really proud of what the PSNI do every day. We will have people that cause us problems and we shouldn't have, like everywhere in society, but we'll deal with them. My biggest concern is legacy. Is moving forward. I've been involved in a huge legacy investigation. During the Troubles, I have every sympathy with the security forces and what they were facing. Since the Good Friday Agreement, we've dealt with legacy legally, I think really badly. Obviously, I've got a big history of dealing with complicated things in London, Scotland Yard, counter-terrorism. If we don't get that right, it's an anchor that will hold back not just the police service of Northern Ireland, but society. It's a critical success factor for us to move forward in the next 2 decades.
I'll go really quick. Quite simply, I would say I'm really proud of the reputation and credibility and the confidence and particularly the trust that we have built for my colleagues, I have to say, have built through their work and with people that we engage with. And that more people want to come and share their stories and talk to us about difficult things, but also we are internationalising our practice and people are wanting to come and learn from us, which I think is great. What I would be most anxious about is if we were ever to lose that, because I think that would take away on everything and anything we can achieve as an organisation. And for me, for us, that is about our principle is about inclusion. So within the gallery, we invite anyone who's engaging with us to tell us what's missing, and to, if they don't feel their perspective or their story is represented, to share that with us. And we bring new objects in and we put them into the gallery and we tell those stories. So I think for me, that's what I would say.
So we have a chance for 2 questions, but you have to get your hand up really quick or you're dead, right? There you go.
Thank you. I have a question for Rojan, and that is, I certainly applaud what you're doing in terms of an integrated education. You said that only 7% of the schools are currently integrated. Do you have a goal for how much that might increase over, say, the next 10 years?
Well, if you're talking about setting targets, we would love all schools to be integrated, and that would be our goal. However, we recognise that schools are very important to communities, very important to the people that go to them. They have their cultural backgrounds, but I think the impact of integrated education, and I talked about the excellence in integrated education, there is nothing to stop any school from taking that on. And I think it's that experience that we will be sharing that will make the whole thing just a natural, organic change over time. And that's what I really hope for. It can't come from the top, it's got to come from the schools themselves, and each school community will make that decision as they go forward.
And one more. If there isn't one, that's fine. Going. Oh, yeah.
I just had a quick question about the museums in particular. Is there one object from the Troubles catalog that that's caused like any controversy, or is there anything that's like particularly notable in the exhibit that you'd like to talk about?
So we have there are some really difficult objects in the gallery. We have particularly, obviously we've the police service, we have the paramilitary organisations on both sides, and we have a lot of weapons and objects that would have been used by them, and they can be really triggering for people. I think what we're able to do at the Ulster Museum is bring not just hard objects but an art collection, and often it's some of the creative approaches that you can bring that help audiences to reflect and understand. And I often point to a piece of art that we have in the Troubles Gallery. It's a quilt called Common Loss. It was created with little patches of red all stitched together, one for every life that was lost during the Troubles, and it hangs on the wall in the gallery. And I think that it's a very powerful reminder of how and the impact of what happened and the devastation and that loss of life. So I think it helps to be able to bring our collections to play alongside our history collections and create a space where people can be challenged but also to reflect.
Thank you very much. I'm quite proud of this part of a television series called Once Upon a Time in Northern Ireland, which aired with the Good Friday Agreement. And I'm very proud of it because it was an attempt to do some of the storytelling, story hearing, in a way which was not about imposing a political narrative first. It was trying to say the politics took its cue from this, actually, from these experiences, and these experiences are part of what it's about. I'm very proud of the people who work here as well, because I think we do have something to say, and I would be anxious that some of what they have done is of use in the world that it's going, because I think these things, how we talk to each other across these divides, has become something which is quite important, and certainly for us it remains something we need to kind of keep nurturing and keep going with. I think the Deputy First Minister made that very clear this morning. I work, and some people here also have worked with an organisation called WAVE, which is a victims organisation. And one of their people always brings a bowl, a Japanese bowl, which is a piece of china which they break, or porcelain, Japanese porcelain being very high quality, break, and then it's put together again with this gold stuff. And it makes the bowl back again, but it makes the bowl back again differently. And the gold stuff is actually stronger than the porcelain. And it's called Kunsagi art. And they have used this as the basis, as a symbol of what they call post-traumatic growth. And I think that is what we're trying to look at here, not just talking about the trauma, but what does, and not denying that all of that happened, but what does post-traumatic growth look like? And I think that's the thing that we're trying to look at here, and be intergenerational in a way which isn't just repeating, but is actually about, okay, that happened, what do we do now? Can I just ask you to say thank you? We're going to go to lunch. I think the way we're going to do lunch, because we have another panel on very quickly, is just go outside. It's a box lunch, isn't that right? Please take your box, have a comfort break, and then maybe within, 10, 15 minutes, try to get back in here. No. 5. As soon as you can, get back here then. Yeah. You're right, Rob. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for, to quote somebody, thank you for attention to this matter. We appreciate your timeliness. Obviously, we want to ensure that we get out of here by 2 o'clock so that public safety will know that the building is closed. So that's why we're rushing things along. I'm Colleen Parsons. I direct Global Irish Studies at Georgetown University. And we are delighted to, for the 4th year running, collaborate with our colleagues at American University and at Ulster University and all of our sponsors and supporters for the Washington Forum on Northern Ireland. It has been a highlight for me at least, and I know for many of you, of the St. Patrick's Week calendar, and we look forward to it being a part of the calendar for many years to come. I will just very quickly read the names of our panelists for our second panel, and to remind you all, if you've just arrived, we are truncated by the weather warning, so we have to be finished by 2. This will be our second and last panel, unfortunately. We have Congressman Joe Crowley here, Speaker Edwin Poots, member of the Legislative Assembly, Councillor Ciara Delaney from the Irish Embassy here in DC, and our colleagues Carolyn Gallagher and Kimberly Cowell-Myers from American University. And the discussion will be moderated with extraordinary professionalism and grace and ease by my colleague, Professor Dara Gannon, who is a professor in the History Department in Georgetown and the Associate Director of Global Irish Studies. I'll hand over to Dara.
Thanks so much, Colleen. That's quite a big build-up for all of us, but I'm sure we're going to meet the challenge. So as you can see, we're gathered here with a stellar panel of experts. I would encourage you to read the official program for all their achievements and accolades, which will certainly inform the discussion. So we're here to talk about America 250. Some of you will be well versed in discussions of same. Others will be coming to this perhaps for the first time. So I think it's important that we perhaps get a primer on what this is, what it means for many of us in the room, and ultimately what is the potential of America 250 in this commemorative year. So Congressman Crowley, I'm going to start with you, if I may. Could you outline maybe briefly the origins of the America 250 Commission, how it's developed since 2016, and specifically, I'm really interested to learn more about your role and how that's developed over the last few years.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank AU, GU, and UU for putting this together, and thank you for having me as well, personally. When I was a member of the House, I was appointed to a commission that was created by law during the Obama administration, known as the Semi-Quincentennial Commission. It's a mouthful, so we've kind of narrowed it down and maybe dumbed it down to A250 or America 250. I was appointed by then Speaker Pelosi as one of the 8 elected officials, 4 from the House and 4 from the Senate, who would participate in the commission that was also made up of 16 private citizens. When I left Congress in 1918, and after Grant Hill, the basketball player, retired from the commission, then Leader Pelosi reappointed me as a public citizen to the commission. So it's 16 citizens, 8 elected officials. We are completely and wholly bipartisan. All representatives of the commission as citizens are appointed by the leaders of the House and the Senate, majority and minority. We're 50-50 Democrat, Republican. We work in a very unified way and a nonpartisan way. Interestingly enough, back in 1976, there was a commission to celebrate the bicentennial, the 200th anniversary of the United States and the Declaration of Independence. That commission was disbanded before 1976 because of some infighting and rivalries and just a lot of mismanagement of funds. We are just about 100 days away from the 4th of July, and we are still we're still operating. So if that's an achievement you should be proud of, I'm proud of that. And under very difficult circumstances, the president himself has created Task Force 250, which has now also leaned into Freedom 250. And we can talk about the differences between them, but I won't play too long. What I will say about what we're about is celebrating the document of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of our country 250 years ago, this July 4th, or July 2nd, depending on the history. We're going about that in a number of ways. So we have held contests for the past few years with high school and grammar school students to write about what the Declaration of Independence means to them, what does America mean to them. The winners of that contest have been able to go to national parks or any other federal entity they wanted to go to spend a weekend. We have been working in conjunction with the private sector as well, so therefore Hilton, for instance, is a sponsor. The airlines are all sponsors as well. We have America Waves, where any American who wants to have an American flag on the July 4th, we will help provide that for them so they can have a memento, but also at their hour to wave the American flag. We have America Innovates, calling upon young people in America to submit their ideas for what lies ahead. And if you think about America of Irish descent, think of Henry Ford or Cyrus McCormick, for instance, two Irish Americans who were tremendous inventors. The Irish have played a role in that as well. We hope to continue to see that as well. We have America Gives. We hope to have the most hours ever in the history of the United States, maybe even the world, of charitable giving of time towards America and our collective America. So we have a number of things that really focusing on the document itself and its meaning, working in partnership with Jeep and Stellantis, and I try what's the stream? It looks like it's a motorhome that looks like a bullet. Airstream. Is it Airstream? Yes. We're in partnership with them and Walmart, going around the country, taking what America means to you and taking down those recordings. So we have that for posterity as well. So a lot more to it. Just on July 4th or 3rd to 4th, and the only time that this will ever happen, we'll have a ball dropping in New York City. Like we do on New Year's Day. We'll have a similar kind of concerts and everything, except it'll be in the summer, not in the winter. And on that on July 4th, we'll be holding America's Block Party, and they'll be all over the United States, but particularly we'll be focusing on the Coliseum in LA. There we will have the largest American flag ever made, and we will be giving that to the city of Los Angeles as they prepare for the 2028 Olympics. So that's just a few of the things we're doing a lot more than that, but in this interest of time.
Well, as the historian in residence, the Irish historian in residence at Georgetown, I'm delighted that we have 350 citizen historians for the year 2026 by the sounds of it, based on what you're telling us. But I'm really interested to follow up on something you said. A lot of this, of course, is state-led, as you've noted, federal led. And I suppose we're talking about divided societies, difficult histories, and there are questions about the value of state-sponsored history. What would you say to that? Like, how should people treat the idea of state-sponsored history, and and how can people get involved in a creative and constructive way?
Well, I think if you look what happened recently in Philadelphia, where it's dictated what is acceptable or not acceptable language is completely un-American. I'll leave it at that. So, because I don't want to get AU or anyone else in trouble. But that's always going to be an issue of controversy. We're trying as best we can to be sensitive to that, but at the same time, take this as an opportunity to celebrate. Look, when, a more perfect union, as the Constitution says, striving for that, recognizing we're never going to be perfect. So one of the other things I just want to mention as well, seeing the speaker here, we have entered into memorandums of understanding with many of the countries around the world, but particularly the countries that were engaged in the Revolutionary War. We'll be having a very special dinner at Mount Vernon in June of this year, where England, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Spain, France, Holland, the Dutch, the Danes, I'm trying to think of who else, but anyone who was involved in the war will be coming as well, since we're not fighting as much, except for Greenland. Well, I think Greenland should go to the Irish, by the way, because it's called Greenland, and we need more space. So.
Thanks for that very helpful answer. I do want to come to Speaker Poots next, but I also want to commend you, Congressman, for your incredible influential role in bringing about those MOUs with both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So, Speaker Poots, I wonder if you could say something about the MOU with Northern Ireland, what this means to the people of Northern Ireland, and does it offer, there's this idea in terms of public history of nation branding, instead of the Troubles being kind of an origin story for Northern Ireland, does the story of 1776 offer a new story for Northern Ireland in America?
I think it offers great opportunities for us, and I commend our Minister, Gordon Lyons, for being the first to sign the Memorandum of Understanding with Joe here and leading the way for others to follow, and we appreciate that. I just want to take you back 300 years ago, and to a village called Strabane, and the river was running through it, and a family sitting around the table, and to another wee house at the bottom of the Sperrins, probably in a clachan. Now, clachan is a group of maybe 15 or 18 cottages where all the farms would be collected together and they keep the animals together and so forth. And I want to take you to another small town called Ballymena. And discussions were going on in those houses, those homes, small cottages, maybe with lots of people in those cottages, 8 or 9 of a family, and 2-bedroom cottages. And the discussion was, we have imposed upon us penal laws, and we don't want to accept this because it's going to kill off any opportunity for our younger people in the family. And we had these people who were Presbyterians, it affected Presbyterians and Roman Catholics, but the Presbyterians in the main were the first wave of people that came to America, 250,000 of them, in the 18th century. And whenever they came, they really became American and left everything behind. But in those houses, those conversations were taking place, and I mentioned those 3 places. One of those houses was in Strabane, and a chap called John Dunlop, who printed the American Constitution, came from Strabane. Another one, James McHenry, was one of the signatories of the Constitution in that home in Ballymena. And Charles Thompson, in that home in Maghera, designed the seal of the United States of America. There's 5 others who signed the Declaration of Independence. And these people, these families made this choice from conviction because they did not want to be part of the established Church of England or Church of Ireland. They were Presbyterians, and they weren't going to be told how they lived their lives by government, and they were headed for the land of the free. And they came here, and they were absolutely involved in the fighting against the English or the British. They were to the forefront of that, and they became your frontiersmen. So names like Daniel Boone, Mark Twain, Sam Houston, Davy Crockett, all had their roots in that whole northern part of Ireland. Took in Donegal, Monaghan, Cavan, that region of Ulster, where many of those people made the choice, we are not going to have a faith forced upon us. We're moving to somewhere where we can live our faith. And that was the driving force, more than money or opportunity. That was the driving force of that first wave leaving. Second wave came at a later point, around 2 million of them. A lot of that was to do with the potato famine. It was to do with hunger. It was to do with a dire situation right across the island of Ireland. There was many people from Ulster went that time as well. But that first wave, the pre-1776 wave, was largely Presbyterians. Now, they're a very stubborn group of people. And we've got a wee word, it's an Ulster Scots word, for describing that stubborn group of people. It's called Thrawn. Thrawing. And that is people who will just not bow down under pressure, whatever it happens to be. They were ideal to come to America in the first instance because if at first you don't succeed, these people were going to try again. They're not going to be knocked down. They weren't going to be put back. Great story in Pennsylvania. Quakers, very nice people. Maybe some here today. But Quakers didn't like violence. And there was an interfaces between themselves and the Native Americans. So what did the Quakers do? They sold the land to the Ulster Scots, to the Scots-Irish, and whenever they bought the land, that created a buffer between them and the Native Americans. So these people were very much frontiers people, down through the Shenandoah Valley, down through the Appalachians, and then headed west. And that is the story that we're so proud of, that so many people, my grandparents, great-great-grandparents, their friends, their cousins, their relatives, their family came to this country and helped to make this great nation.
I'm so pleased that you actually named those people by name, because Patrick Griffin of the University of Notre Dame has said of the Scots-Irish that they were the people of no name because they integrated so seamlessly into American society. So I think that's hugely important. Just to follow up on that, Speaker Poots, the question, though, of this idea of shared past, shared future is a very common refrain in commemorations. Do you think this 1776 story has a life beyond 2026 in Northern Ireland? Is it something that can be shared across the divide in Northern Ireland as an origin story?
One thing we're very good at is knocking ourselves down, and anybody does well, telling, sort of taking the rug from under them. So I do think that it is a story that we should be proud of, and it's a story that should be told more and more. And, the Scots-Irish element that have came to America, as I say, they largely dispersed into the south. I was visited Chattanooga and Knoxville one time, and I happened to ask them, why is there so few Presbyterian churches in this area? Because you all claim that you've got Scots-Irish roots. The Presbyterians didn't have enough ministers, and the local people had their own meetings. They called them campfire meetings. So somebody that have sat around the meeting, and that if somebody would have played the banjos and the instruments that they brought with them, a lot of the country music and bluegrass music derived from in conjunction with the African Americans who came and their mandolins and so forth. But they'd have sat around the campfires and they'd played their instruments and they'd have sang, and somebody would have prayed and somebody would have preached and somebody would have testified of their life story of how they became a Christian and so forth. And the church authorities didn't like this, so they came down and they tried to close all of this down. But being dissenters, they said, well, we're not having that. So they all left the Presbyterian Church, and that's why the Southern Baptist is such a huge denomination in the southern part of America. Those people would have all been Presbyterian roots originally, because they came from that Scots-Irish. So it is typical of, the Reformed faith and the Protestant denomination. It broke away from the Roman Catholic Church, then it broke away from the Church of England, and then it broke away from the Presbyterian Church and so forth. So dissent is something that doesn't stop with one generation. Dissenting carries through for many generations.
Very interesting. We're going to come back to that hopefully. Ciara, I'd like to come to you and just, I wonder if you could outline for us the Irish government's response to America 250 and how that aligns with the Northern Ireland Executive, but also differs.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dara. First of all, just want to say it's always a pleasure for the Irish Embassy to be associated and to support the Northern Ireland Forum. So, and thanks very much for the invitation today. I think our involvement, as already two of the strands have been spoken about in really great detail. We have a kind of four-strand approach by the government. That is Ireland as an international partner, as Congressman Crowley said. So we've also signed the MOU with America 250. We are very keen on highlighting that distinctive Ulster contribution to America, both founding fathers and the signatories of the Declaration, as you said, the printer of the Declaration. And we're participating with the Northern Ireland Executive and through our consulate in Atlanta in a programme of events involving Georgia Southern University. So very excited to do that. I think a population that now calls themselves Scots-Irish, and that's a really important element. We, being a government, we are keen on academic series, you're happy to note, and we've already supported the Bridging the Atlantic seminar here in Washington, which our Foreign Minister, Helen McEntee, addressed. And we've got a series of, with very many other American universities, as you might imagine, the Notre Dame, Villanova, but as I said, Georgia Southern as well, and a number of others. And I think what we're really keen on doing through all of this engagement is that fourth strand, which is telling the story of Ireland and America, both the founding and the subsequent development of this amazing country, which Irish people have been so involved in. 31.5 million people claim Irish heritage. Some additional actually probably claim Scots heritage, but actually their heritage is from but their heritage is from the island of Ireland. So we really want to highlight that. We've got a couple of, we'll have a documentary from this small island, which has been airing around the States and which will get more publicity. We also have a really good exhibition from EPIC, which is a great museum. I was really interested in the Ulster Museum and what they've been doing and how we look back on your history and all of its complexities. And we have an exhibition, some of which was on show at the Irish residence last night for our big St. Patrick's Day party. But it's a larger exhibition and we'll be highlighting that as well. So I suppose those are the main strands, if you like, Dara. Yeah.
So the many highlights. And I should state, of course, as I'm sure Congressman Crowley will be keen to emphasize, this is a year-long commemoration and or celebration, right? Even though a lot of roads lead to the 4th of July.
No, it actually goes, our commission is by law, runs through 2027. So we're going to continue this. And in answer to the question posed to the speaker, I'll just do it really quickly. I hope that there are reverberations of the celebration. And I think it is interesting to note, when you think of this, the Revolution of 1776, the Declaration of Independence, the French Revolution, the 1798 uprising, where there was that unification between dissenters and the Catholic community within Ireland, not without issues, but and serious, sad events as well. But maybe that notion that what they left Ireland for were the same reasons that many of the Republicans themselves during the 1840s, for instance, and going to 1916 were fighting for as well in terms of that separation,
That's a really powerful message, that shared history over time, notwithstanding space. Ciara, just very briefly to follow up, because something, again, this conversation today more broadly is about how our respective societies can learn from each other. And Ireland, between 2012 and 2023, undertook a very deliberate process of commemoration, the Decade of Centenaries. What do you think, potentially, in America, we can learn from that, sometimes very difficult, those difficult conversations in the Decade of Centenaries?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Could I just hark back to something earlier? The Deputy First Minister said that peace is not an event. And I thought, and revolution is not an event. It starts something. But then, as you've just said, you have to build on that. And you're building on your you know, the values of liberty and democracy and equality of opportunity. And these are really amazing ideals, but it's a constant piece of work to keep working on those. And so in Ireland, when we were coming up to our centenary of revolution and a war of independence, and then independence for 26 counties, the Republic of Ireland, a lot of thought went into how we would commemorate. What turned out, what we decided to do was a decade of commemoration, which was a really big undertaking. And what that allowed us to do was to look at a whole range of events and specific events, but also I would say maybe a range of kind of just the development, if you like, of what happened on the island and what subsequently happened. And what was very clear was that this is something that we have a shared history, but not always a shared truth. And that was touched on earlier as well, and I think that's really important. So the guiding principle, or the guiding hand, if you like, was an independent commission of experts, which is sometimes a dirty word, but many of them were historians. And I just want to remember Dr. Eamon Phoenix, who was really seminal in the work of that independent commission, which advised the government on how to go about this, a very sensitive approach to what happened during the decade from 1912 to 1923, and encompassed as well, of course, the Civil War as well. And that was really, really important. And I think some of the lessons that were learned out of it was listening to everybody's story and trying to reflect the different aspects of what had happened, but also, similar to what you just said, Congressman, bringing it down to a community level, that it can't be driven from the top. It can't be a government-only piece and almost like an instruction of this is what happened and this is how we'll remember it. It has to be driven from the grassroots and from communities. And some of the most impactful events, actually, or commemorations, happened at that in schools. The flag, you reminded me. So one of the things that was done was that there was quite moving ceremonies in every school in Ireland to receive an Irish flag and to think about that. Libraries, community organisations, north and south across the island, and I think that kind of had the biggest impact for many people in remembering what happened. Yeah.
Fascinating, fascinating. So Carol and Kimberly, my wonderful colleagues on the panel here, I want to come to you next and rereading, I should say, over the weekend, your wonderful book, Building a Green Wall. You should all buy it, by the way, if you haven't already. I was...
Thank you.
Sure, we got that on record. Struck by your discussion of ideas of opportunity structures and how these are perhaps external circumstances or external events which give movements energy and which give movements opportunities to mobilize. Do you think America 250 as an opportunity structure gives the Irish American community an opportunity to mobilize?
I think so, and I think one of the things that would be very useful for America 250 in this regard is to bring the two histories of the 1800s and the 1776 generation together. And I can talk about this from a personal perspective. So I grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia, and my last name is Gallagher, and my dad used to always say, "We're Irish." And then but he didn't have anything to tap it into. He was not part of the second wave of Irish Americans who came here and were tapped into the political culture. But he still, after all that time, still saw us as Irish. But again, we didn't really have this deep history to connect it to. And so I think this commission that lays out the two sides, the two elements of the migration and brings them into conversation with one another, and to also find a way to see it as a part of the same thing at different times, and a people divided by many things, but still also united by the fact that they were leaving and coming here is an opportunity to do that.
Thank you. And I would just add on that this is a moment, as we're all familiar with, fraught, full of landmines, particularly for the Irish, and diplomatic ties are strained in many regards, that this is an opportunity for Irish America to draw attention to its contributions to American history and its centrality in many of the important moments in our history. I think the Irish America 250 organization has been very clever about positioning itself so as to draw attention to the importance of Irish America from kind of all different parts of the island and all different beliefs and understandings. I think it's very clever to emphasize all of those contributions and make that the important part of the conversation in the present.
Can I just on that note, I know Kevin Sullivan is here. I recently participated in an event with Irish America 250, and the emphasis really was, in many respects, on Ulster itself, for the most part, given that you mentioned the number of presidents or signatories to the documents were from Ulster. So thank you, Kevin, for all you've done to as cleverly as you've done that, too. So.
I think we would all agree with that. And actually, there's a great quote in the book, again, which I think speaks to this. One of your interviewees, who was off the record, characterized Irish America as, quote, high-minded, I'm looking at you, Kevin, high-minded, well-connected, dedicated, and tireless. So I think that speaks to Kevin J. Sullivan's great work over this year so far. Let me just bring it back to Carol and Kimberly more broadly. Within public history, there's this idea of shared authority, right? That historians and academics specifically do not, or more generally rather, don't have ownership of the past. How do you feel about that in terms of Irish America today? Do you feel like, other stakeholders should have a vested interest in guarding our future?
You mean Irish American stakeholders?
Specifically, yes.
Well, I think it's always a moving target, and so that gives you an opportunity to redefine who is in the fold. And I will also say one of the things that really struck Kimberly and I both when we were working on this book is how many people in what we called Irish America weren't actually Irish American. Kimberly is a good example. She's actually Lithuanian. And so it was like there was something about the connection to Northern Ireland and Ireland that was visceral, and it was to some genetic, but to others an ethos they just couldn't let go. And so I think that that's a lesson that public history is always what the public makes of it. And there's a lot of scope there to keep Irish America going, but also to rethink and expand in many ways what it is.
Could I ask a personal question of Congressman Crowley in that regard? Because I think you're in a unique position, given your formal role on the commission, but with obviously a very proud Irish heritage, Irish American heritage. How do you feel that heritage informs your day-to-day job?
Well, my day-to-day job today, you mean, as opposed to when I was in office, you mean?
In terms of the commission and America 250 specifically.
Oh, I see. Well, obviously as a member of the commission and knowing Kevin and knowing so many people here in D.C. or around the country of Irish descent, knowing my mom was born in Armagh, and so I have that direct connectivity to the north end as well as the south. So
I was able to introduce Joe to his cousin, who is a member of the Legislative Assembly for Newry Armagh.
That's right.
So Justin, who's a very good GA player.
Yeah, Justin McNulty.
Yeah.
He got that from me. They
All
won
those
the
good
All-Ireland
genes.
one year in football. Yeah, so I do think, I think it's also a pronouncement of the Irish American community that they wanted to be involved in this. The Italian American community is doing the same thing. There are others, other communities are coming forth, the Polish community, the German community, recognizing the role that they played during the wars as well. So that is happening. I just kind of because I'm Irish and they assigned me many of the Irish roles to participate in. I think that given the influence that we did have, though, on the document itself, the signatures of it, as well as the war, we were a big part of the American and Continental forces during that time. So, it's hard to divorce the Irish or Scots-Irish participation in the revolution itself. On a small note, for instance, baseball. We're going to have tomorrow night the conclusion of the World Baseball Classic. Ireland does not have a team in the World Baseball Classic, interestingly enough. Yet at one time in the early 20th century, 30% of all Major League Baseball players were either Irish-born or of Irish descent. So the Irish have had an incredible influence on the development of America writ large from the Revolution, but that continued and continues to this day. But that's an interesting point, too, in terms of the impact that we've made on America.
I'm going to just say that on the Scots-Irish stuff, I was pressing heavily, how religious people they were. They weren't all, right of centre, tough religious people. So Francis Hutcheson, for example, was a huge influencer with Thomas Jefferson and the whole issue of the rights of individuals and, equality and all of that. But there was another group of people, and they brought moonshine with them. And manufacturing alcohol from potatoes was something which was a specialism, particularly in County Tyrone. So they brought that to America with them. And then in the years of Prohibition, there was a clamp down on all of this. So the moonshiners decided to take evasive action. And at that time, the cars that they were driving, they massively increased the performance of those cars so they could outrun our friend Chief Constable Boucher's American police friends, and that they wouldn't get caught. And out of that came NASCARs. So there's all of these just intricacies and interesting things that, different people just spread right across this nation and had different roles in creating things that you would never have dreamt of in the first instance.
It sort of takes us in a slightly different direction, but I was thinking about Congressman Crowley's comment about Italian Americans and Polish Americans and German Americans organizing around America 250, and I was thinking, yes, and the English Americans have a harder time with that particular issue, and it's something that, that we were also noting in our book on Irish American lobbying, is that there is not a counter lobby. And we found that absolutely fascinating. So more people would claim British American heritage, but British Americans don't organize in the way that Irish Americans do.
But there are also the ascendancy, too. In other words,
Yes.
I mean, it's a given almost, whereas that wasn't the case necessarily with the Irish, so.
Yeah. But that Irish Americans retain their sense of Irishness many generations later. Like we use the example of President Joe Biden, whose nearest relative emigrated 170 years ago, but he called himself Irish. And you don't get that with the British Americans, the English Americans in the same way.
Yeah, that sense of identity seems to have been threaded through the discussion today. So it's fascinating in terms of the diaspora and the migration stories, plural. And I think it's really important that Congressman Crowley identified the pluralistic nature of migration that we're talking about today. To conclude the panel, I want to talk about the question of legacy. I should state to John Boucher, that's a lowercase L legacy that we're talking about. And I'm curious to hear from each of you what you would like to see the legacy of America 250 to be for your respective stakeholders, your respective constituencies, obviously in relation to Ireland and Irish identity. So, Congressman Crowley, we'll start with you. This is a big question.
I thought I get to go last, but that's all right. One of the things we're doing are time capsules. And hope to have incorporated into those time capsules. We're doing two, one here in Washington and one in Philadelphia. Some aspect of Irish America to be included in that. We're going to the moon. We're going about the next lunar shot and Artemis and A250 Commission's logo. You'll see it on the very big on the ship itself. What I really from maybe first. An American standpoint, that this not be the end of the experiment, that this is, as we mentioned before in terms of revolution, Thomas Jefferson said you always had to keep having revolution in order to keep this going, that the spirit of what those men and women, particularly the men, in terms of the sacrifice that they made. There's always women there. They're not in the pictures or in the paintings, but women were there because the men couldn't be there unless there were women. But the sacrifices they made, they were willing to give up their fortunes and their honor. They knew when they signed the Declaration of Independence that they were signing their own death warrant, potentially, and so. The bravery of those individuals, where they came from, the fortitude where they came from, and that's something that I would want to think that all Americans could appreciate or should be able to appreciate, whether they see themselves there or not, whether they see a person of their color or their ethnicity or their race, that they find something in that they can all identify with, and that is continuing, and not just something for the past. that we're just looking back on, or what we're living right now for, but passing that on to future generations. I can tell you when I was 14, I was exhilarated by the bicentennial. I just thought it was wonderful, and never really fully developed, but seeing the tall ships, seeing everything that it meant about America, and what we had to offer, not just for ourselves, but for the world. I want that to continue as well. When it comes to Ireland, I do think that this is an opportunity, once again, to focus on the shared input of all communities. I think of Hercules Mulligan, who is a very not as well-known American patriot, was born Catholic in Coleraine in the north, comes to America, I think, for religious persecution as well, not unlike the Scots-Irish. Is the first person to take in Alexander Hamilton when he came in from the islands, and was one of Washington's spy network in New York City. Did it so well that the American patriots suspected him as being a British sympathizer until George Washington comes to the city, and one of the first people he has breakfast with is Hercules Mulligan. And not without controversy, as a man named Cato, an African American or an African slave maybe at that time. It's a little unclear in history. I do think that Mulligan probably did own him, but that without Cato being able to get that information to the Patriot cause, we may not be here speaking the funny accents we have. We may very well have English accents at this point. So that combination of Hercules and Cato working together, Cato eventually got his freedom in 1783, but that was unique in terms of America. So there are ways in which we as Irish America, in conjunction, especially with our African American brothers and sisters, can talk about that contribution. Without it, we would not have won the war. So,
Mulligan saved Washington's life twice.
At least twice, yeah.
In the village that I come from, which is Hillsborough, now known as Royal Hillsborough, Benjamin Franklin came in 1771, and these were discussions to try to iron out the problems that existed between America and Britain at that time, and those discussions didn't go well. So he met Lord Hillsborough, and those discussions did not go well. And that, whenever Benjamin Franklin came back from those discussions, he had a determination to do something different. I see in terms of legacy, we have thousands of jobs created by Americans in Northern Ireland. And, there is a massive legacy that continues to go on there. So America has taken opportunities, and particularly the banks. So, 3 o'clock Eastern time, people in Northern Ireland will be headed into work and will start doing all of this work. So when the Americans get up at 8 o'clock or go into their jobs at 8 o'clock in the morning, there's so much work that's been done and already transferred back to America from the day before. And it works so well. And, we are cousins, and that's just the reality. And it's good to keep those connections, and it's good to have that legacy carried on through business, through culture. We have 4 universities come over, play ice hockey. There's lots of interaction between the universities. I host American senators, Congress people, people from the state legislatures all of the time. And the interest that exists between America and Ireland, be it Northern Ireland or Irish Republic, it's just immense. And I think that's not something that's going to go away anytime soon.
I'm so happy Hamilton has been mentioned because I absolutely adore it. And I was thinking earlier, one of the great songs is In the Eye of the Storm, and we are in the eye of the storm. But as well as Hercules Mulligan, can we hear it for the ladies? And Lydia Dara was born in Dublin, and she moved to Philadelphia, and she was a spy. She passed a lot of intelligence to the Continental Army as well. So the female contribution, sadly, not always recognised through the history books, but we can do a little bit of work to improve that. And I think, on legacy, I suppose, as well as being the statesmen and the signatories, as you said, 3 born on the island of Ireland, 8 of Irish heritage, down through the centuries, I think we have Irish people have made a huge contribution to the development of America. Very traditional kind of roles, which I also was thinking about earlier when John Boucher was talking about the police service. The policemen, largely so synonymous with the Irish American community, firemen, particularly, well, all over, but many in New York and Boston and other so-called Irish cities. The women were the teachers and the nurses. And I think the legacy will be that hopefully when we are celebrating and commemorating the tricentenary, that we will look back at a whole new generation of contribution to that Irish-America partnership, the economic partnership in particular, exactly as you've said, Speaker. But from the Republic of Ireland, we are the 5th largest investor in a foreign direct investment in the US now, the 5th largest. It's absolutely incredible, creating 200,000 jobs here in America. So I'm looking forward. If you're sending Artemis to the moon to remember 250, our contribution to the high-tech industries, I think, so many new industries which have developed and which we're really featuring in the island of Ireland and selling abroad. I think our legacy will have developed. So hopefully we'll still remember the likes of Hercules and Lydia, but and the great statesmen, but we'll also be looking at the next wave of Irish-American involvement and Ireland's involvement in the US.
I have two quick things, but they're related. One is that nations thrive with immigration. They are created through immigration. And we're in a moment right now where a lot of people all over the world don't want immigration, but how you thrive and become a place is through immigration. And I think with the context of Irish Americans, I think one of the things that Irish and Northern Irish migrants did here is they really helped us put together our rugged spirit of individualism. It takes a lot to cross the Appalachian Mountains without cars, on foot in winter, and to also do your moonshine on the side. That takes some hardcore work. But it also takes community spirit to build bluegrass, right? To build your mandolin and put it in concert with a banjo, or to build politics in a city where you are intensely poor. And so that's the communitarian and the individualism and those two spirits coming together, and immigration brought us that.
Those are all wide-ranging responses. I might, indulge as chair briefly, just to say in terms of memory, I think it's really important that our stories are not lost beyond 2026 or indeed 2027. There's a well-worn aphorism about Irish immigration that speaking to the double marginalization of the Irish migrant. They leave the island once, but their records also leave with them. And I think something that we can really build in terms of the stories you've all been telling on this panel so far, whether it's individuals or kind of institutional memories and so on, is maybe thinking about a museum space or a site of memory in which these collective stories can be told across the Atlantic. I think there's something there going forward. But we have about 5 minutes for Q&A. So if people have questions, we'd really, especially from our students here who've taken so much time out of their busy schedules to be with us, if you have questions for our panelists, we really welcome that. If you want to raise your hand with a question, anyone in the room? Yeah, just over here.
First of all, wonderful panel, learned so much. I'll be honest, I really wasn't into America 250, but now hearing all these great events, I'm like, wow, I just wasn't feeling it. So thank you. And is there any chance that the Smithsonian Congressman Crowley would do an exhibit like that and really with
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the Smithsonian's finding itself in a bit of a bind right now with the administration. Lonnie Bunch is part of the commission. Each of the departments within the government are a part of our commission, including the Department of Defense or Department of War, depending how you look at it. So I know that they will be participating. There will be a 50-state kind of fair on the Great Lawn, or the, called the Great Lawn, I guess it's called, or the Great Mall, the mall, which we are going to participate with the White House on. That's something we're going to do jointly. There are some things we're not participating in. We're not participating in the race. But do that people do whatever you want. We're not participating in the grudge match or the ultimate fighting match or the Patriot Games. That's what the White House's Task Force 250's been engaged in. Nothing against it, but I just don't see the relevance to the Declaration of Independence. I think celebrating is fine. I think fireworks, all that's fine. I think they will be participating. It's just been, I think they've had a little bit of a rougher time, as has some of the other entities that were fully engaged and fully on board. They've kind of taken a little bit step back. But we're still operating despite some of the difficulties. As I said, we're charged by Congress and by law, and we're going to continue to do the work we're engaged in, and we're going to do it by hook or by crook. We're going to make it happen.
Thank you for that excellent question. There's a question second row from the back, just on the left-hand side. Just wait for the microphone. And please tell us who you are. We'd love to hear from you.
Graydon March, I'm a freshman at American University. I'm just wondering, beyond 250 in this year, what are some philanthropic missions that the embassy or the institutions up here can do beyond this year and looking forward?
What a great question. I'm going to have to put on the thinking cap for that, yeah. Because, that's the thing. You don't want it to just be a moment in time and then move on to the next thing. It's to have that lasting legacy. But I think that's what the embassy works on all the time, is to spread the word about our relationship, our historic relationship, and also what it means now. So I don't have a specific philanthropic idea, but I think Kevin O'Sullivan has been name-checked earlier, and he and others are also very involved in a piece of work around what it means to be the future of Irish America, and that's something that we are certainly very conscious of. And the 31.5 million is an impressive number, but when I first came to the States on my first posting in the late 90s, it was 44 million. So that's a number that is perhaps in decline, either because people aren't acknowledging, or, as you have just said, immigration is much harder. So that's for sure something that we're very conscious of and doing our best to work on.
Well, we can add a little context too, just that Irish America is more divided than it ever has been historically. In the latest information, latest survey, something like 50% of Irish Americans call them, identify as Protestant, and 30% as Catholic, and the rest have no religious identity. You don't disaggregate voting records by both ethnicity and race, but we know, and religion, but we know that white Catholics have broken for Republican candidates at the presidential level since 2000. So Irish America is also more geographically dispersed than it ever has been historically, and makes up 5% of a larger number of congressional districts than any other ethnic group in the U.S. And so it's an interesting problem what it means to be Irish American moving forward. Again, I've been called out. I'm not one of you all. But I'm fascinated by how Irish Americans identify as Irish and what it means to be Irish American, and particularly curious. I'm quite curious about why people retain such an affinity for so long, and it does seem like a really pressing problem. Certainly, that the Irish Embassy has begun devoting a good bit of attention to, and academics are interested in, is sort of how does Irish America continue to be influential, and how does it continue to express itself, and what does its identity mean as those ties attenuate over time, and certainly as Ireland changes so much. It used to be that Irish Americans identified, themselves as, in part through their contributions sending money back, and that's very different now. Ireland's GDP is higher than the U.S., that of the U.S. Although you have to purchasing power parity, it's not quite the same, but still, Ireland's whole identity has changed so much that being Irish American is also sort of being driven towards reflection there.
And that's a really important point, because this hybrid term of Irish American or Italian American or African American derived here, but actually it's a term that we're using in Ireland because we have so many people who have come from Lithuania or Poland or Nigeria and are really contributing to Ireland. And they, in turn, hopefully, some of them or their descendants will come to America. So that's going to be a really interesting combination of heritages and identities, and how we foster that as well will be really important.
I thought it was fascinating that there is a new organization created in recent years. It's the American Irish State Legislators Caucus. And the fact that it's called American Irish First, it's not Irish American, it's American Irish. You can tell it was actually an Irish person who conceived of this. That's Mark Daly, the senator, has done so much to build relations between Ireland and the U.S.
Excellent. There's one more hand there. Yeah, just wait for the microphone. We've got one more question, I think.
Hi, I'm Dennis Houlihan. I'm with Solus Nua. We're a DC-based contemporary Irish arts company. So I want to just touch on a couple of points. One, for the embassy. Let me tell you that Solus Nua wouldn't be here today if there weren't for probably two big institutions. One is the Immigrant Support Program of the Irish Embassy and the District of Columbia Commission on Arts and the Humanities. We existed before both of them made major contributions into the organization as volunteers, but we've grown because of that. So that's an interesting thing. You wouldn't expect necessarily that the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities would be a supporter of an Irish-oriented group that's associated with contemporary Ireland. It's about the art and it's about the quality, and that's building relationships between Irish artists and artists here in DC and also in the region. The other question, one of the things of being involved in this organization for so long, and on St. Patrick's Day, we give out free literature. We gave it out yesterday this year. But people would continuously come up to us on the street and say, well, I'm Irish. Well, it got to be a joke where you can't tell who's Irish by how they look, right? But I mean, that's the question of who is Irish. Now, I have the brand name, right? So growing up, Houlihan, always, you must be Irish. But actually, my grandparents on the other side of the family are Scottish immigrants, and I grew up with them. So I actually grew up much more in a Presbyterian household, but I went to Catholic church. But on the way over today, the cab driver was African. And he said, where are you going? Are you a professor here? I said, no, I'm going to this thing. And we started talking. When he said, if you're African, you hear Irish, we're all one. But I ran into that. So many African Americans, both African immigrants in his case, or Africans who came through other circumstances, have roots. And I find them asking me about, well, what was that connection to the Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett? My great-great-grandmother's from Tennessee. I think we're Irish. So anyway, I just leave that observation.
Thanks so much for that, Dennis. As ever, we leave with more questions and answers. That's the way it should be. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel of experts.
So it is, as we step down here from the stage, it's my pleasure to introduce our closing speaker, the Right Honourable Hilary Benn, MP, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Would you like to come to the front?
From here, if that's all right. Now, good afternoon. Right, there we are. Well, I feel like I should apologise for the weather because, of course, your proceedings have been truncated because of the tornado warnings, and I hope everybody gets home safely. It is a great pleasure. I'm very sorry that I wasn't able to hear more of the discussion that was taking place because of other engagements that I had, but I want to say it's a pleasure to be back here at this wonderful event. I want to thank Kimberly, Carolyn, Colin, Duncan, and Dara for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. I was very interested, sir, in the comments you were making as I walked through the door, because my mother's great-grandfather was born in County Fermanagh in 1850, and when he was about 18, made the journey across to America, ended up in Cincinnati, from whence my mother returned on to visit Oxford on a 9-day summer school in 1948, where she met a man who, the night before she was due to go back, asked her to marry him, and she agreed, and she returned to Cincinnati to be met at the train station by her mum, her dad, and my uncle Graydon, who is still alive. He's in his 90s, and she said, "I've got something to tell you," and Graydon is very on the ball. He said, "Well, what's his name?" And my mother proceeded to tell her somewhat discombobulated parents she'd agreed to marry a man they had never, ever met. But she was always destined, I think, to live her life not in Cincinnati, but somewhere else because of who she was. So I tell the story, and we could all tell stories like this, can we not, if we search back in our family histories long enough. It's a story of the thread in families and in countries that binds Ireland, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America together. And Northern Ireland's story in recent years has been a truly remarkable one, not least because of what happened in April 1998, when the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and what had seemed impossible was made possible. And on the 25th anniversary, I walked into the House of Commons. I didn't even know there was a debate on the Good Friday Agreement taking place, and I saw it on the order paper. And I thought, well, I think I'll go along. One or two things I might want to say. And I told the story of the night. I was living in London at the time. The only time during the Troubles I heard a bomb go off in London. It's a very particular sound, not as you might imagine. And I was in bed. I was so convinced it was in the local shopping street. I got out, got dressed, went down to Kensington High Street. For those of you who know it, there was no bomb there. It was 2.5 miles away. And I said to my fellow parliamentarians, if at that moment someone had tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hilary, I know it looks bad, but I have been to the future. And I bring you back news that one day the Reverend Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness will find themselves sitting side by side in a power-sharing government as First and Deputy First Minister in Northern Ireland." And I said, had that happened, I would have said to the time traveller, well, I would love to live to see that day, but I fear I will not. But I did, we did. And that is the power of politics, the willingness to compromise. You know, when you are trying to make peace, and I know you had a really good session, the first thing today about that, and you were hearing from people with great experience and insight, it's so much easier to say no than it is to say yes. Isn't that the lesson of all peace processes that have been successful? It's when you're prepared to say yes and take a risk. It's much easier to say no, to remain, I am a victim, you are my oppressor. And then you go around the table and you're saying, no, 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 I'm the victim and you're my oppressor. You can carry on like that till the cows come home, but it isn't going to enable a problem to be solved. But on that miraculous Good Friday, an agreement was reached, then supported by the people of Northern Ireland in that famous referendum. If you've now, any of you seen Derry Girls? Yeah, right, a lot of nodding. Well, I also said in the House of Commons that everyone should be required to watch the last episode of Derry Girls, which is all about the referendum. And the character whose name I've forgotten says to her grandfather, but what if it doesn't work? And he looks at her and says, but what if it does? And for me, that was the moment. And you could see she took this in and off she went. It took a lot of extraordinary hard work and bravery and leadership and courage. And it wasn't simply an end to violence. It was a blueprint for a new society, one based on partnership and equality and mutual respect. And when you look back from the vantage point of 2026 on what Northern Ireland has achieved, the transformation that has been wrought by this, it is one of the most remarkable peace processes, certainly in my lifetime. And those involved should be very proud of what they did. It established the power sharing executive. It created a framework where you could hold one identity, both. I can be British, I can be Irish, I can be both, I can be Northern Irish. Increasingly, as younger people in Northern Ireland choose to identify themselves, and there was parity of esteem. Now, I'm not standing here today, because you know this already, to tell you the path of progress has been irredeemably smooth, because it hasn't. We've had 40% of the time since then where there has been no government in Northern Ireland at all. And how can you act on behalf of the citizens you represent if you disappear from the job and leave a vacuum behind for others to try and fill? So it is a living project. It is, from time to time, fragile. It's come under pressure from Brexit and the Windsor Framework, which is a source of contention in Northern Ireland. But it's really quite simple. Once the decision was made to leave, and I certainly wouldn't have started from here if it was down to me, and I say that as a passionate Remainer, you had the EU with one set of rules, you had the UK with another set of rules, and an open border between the two. Well, how are you proposing to deal with that? You had to find a means of enabling trade to flow while respecting each other's rules and circumstances, and that is how we ended up with the Windsor Framework. And as we meet here today, there are negotiations taking place between the United Kingdom and the European Union on a number of fronts to do with a closer relationship, including an SPS agreement, plants, animals, food, that will make a really big difference to the economy of Northern Ireland, and indeed the economy of the United Kingdom and the economy of the European Union, because we'll be able to trade those goods much more easily in the future. But I would say to you today, a swinging between existence and limbo, 60% of the time, 40% of the time, we need to move beyond that, it seems to me, to provide continuous, stable leadership. Because peace is not just about the absence of conflict, it's providing opportunity, and the Good Friday Agreement certainly paved the way for that. So when I look at Northern Ireland in 2026, what a fabulous place to live and work in and visit and invest in. I say to investors, come, look, see, believe, and give us your money to provide a business, better life for the citizens of Northern Ireland, but to take maximum advantage of the opportunities that Northern Ireland presents, including the best of all worlds that the Windsor Framework provides. Because if you want to invest somewhere to export freely to the rest of the United Kingdom and Europe, there is literally no better place to do that than from Northern Ireland. The economy is doing really not bad compared to the rest of the UK. It has the lowest unemployment. It does have the highest level of economic inactivity. You've got the two things side by side, and there are complex reasons for that, including skills, the impact of the Troubles, and there are some structural challenges that need to be addressed. Productivity remaining lower than the UK average, infrastructure under severe strain. There's a lot of planning applications that can't proceed for homes and for businesses in Northern Ireland because the water infrastructure can't cope. Now, governments need, the government in Northern Ireland needs to sort this out. It needs to sort it out. Everyone knows that it is under extraordinary pressure. So, looking to the future, we need to invest, of course, in skills to meet the needs of a modern workforce. We need to transform the public services, because one of the facts about Northern Ireland is that it gets more money in recognition of its greater need, and that's absolutely right and proper, an extra 24% compared to England. So it has more money per head, let's say, for health. And if you look at the waiting list to see a consultant for the first time, of the people in Northern Ireland who are waiting to see that consultant, 50% of them currently are waiting more than a year. I mean, it's an astonishing figure. In England, the comparable figure with less money per head is 4%. Now, figure that one out. And what is it about? It tells you there needs to be a reform in the way in which public services are delivered, which Mike Nesbitt, as the Health Minister, is beginning. And I really welcome the steps he's taking, but there are other things that need to be done. The one other thing I wanted to address before bringing proceedings to a close is to talk about legacy, because although the Good Friday Agreement achieved so many wonderful and extraordinary things, those who took part knew that the legacy of the Troubles, how do we come to terms with the past and the terrible things that happened, they knew it needed to be done, but they knew they were not in a position to do it at that moment in time because they had their work cut out to agree the power sharing arrangements and so on. So I and many others have talked about it as the unfinished business of the Good Friday Agreement. And John, I know John Boucher spoke about that earlier on today, because I've met far too many people, the family members of people who were killed during the Troubles in the most awful, bloody brutality. That is the story of the Troubles, the 3,500 lives that were lost, 1,100 members of the security forces, 90% of the people who were killed by the IRA, the UDA, the UVF and the INLA, and families who say, I still don't know actually what happened. How and at whose hands did my loved one die? They're searching still for answers 20, 30, 40, in some cases 50 years after the event. And our predecessor government passed a piece of legislation that didn't have any support amongst victims and survivors in Northern Ireland, nor amongst the political parties. It's not often that you get the political parties in Northern Ireland all to agree on something. They all agree on supporting an SPS agreement with the EU, and they all agreed that trying to give immunity to those who took lives during the Troubles was wrong, and the legislation was found to be incompatible with our legal obligations. So we came in committed to repeal and replace it, and that is the basis of the agreement the British government reached with the Irish government in September, the framework. The first time we'd come together to do that since Stormont House in 2014, and the Troubles Bill, which I introduced in the House of Commons and which is making its way through, to ensure that we have a way of finding answers for those families. In the end, bills are complex things. There's a lot of wiring and piping to make a system work. But when people say to me, Hilary, what's this for? Why are you doing this? It is to create a system that is legally compliant, because that will unlock cooperation from Ireland. Ireland, as part of that framework agreement, said, if you do that, we will give the fullest possible cooperation with the Reformed Legacy Commission. What does that mean? That information that some of those families have been looking for a long time may be revealed to help them get the answers that they are looking for. Secondly, it is to create a system that everyone across Northern Ireland, all opinions, all communities, can have confidence in. The last system that we inherited did not have the confidence of significant parts of the community, so that in the end more people can find answers insofar as it is possible to provide them. And I'm not naive, and there will be some people who will never find out what happened. I was asked a question when I went to the wonderful Wave Centre by a man who'd lost his brother, and he said, how can you think that you can pass legislation to require me to be reconciled with what happened to my brother? And I looked at him and I said, I can't, and I'm not seeking to do that. Reconciliation cannot come from legislation. In the end, reconciliation has to come from within. And what I have learned is families have dealt with the trauma and the heartache and the loss and the suffering that they've been through in many, many, many different ways. And each family has to find its own route to coming to terms with it. But it's our job to make sure that we can finally complete the work of the Good Friday Agreement, because if we are able in time to move beyond the legacy of the past. And with the right will and the right leadership, Northern Ireland has a fabulous future ahead of it. Thank you very much indeed.
I think that's a wrap, everybody. It is still on. Okay. We just wanted to say thank you again so very much to all our speakers, to everyone in the audience. Thank you for making it such a wonderful, if abbreviated, day. Thank you to all our supporters and sponsors and to our partner organizations. It's so wonderful to work with the other universities and our wonderful team. Thank you, and be safe, and have a happy St. Patrick's.
And also, thanks to our speakers for dealing with the potential of an impending tornado. We appreciate it.
Be safe, everyone.